Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guests today are Michael Bohn, AIA Partner, and Kirk Keller, Principal and Director of Landscape Architecture at Studio 111 in Long Beach, California. As a licensed architect and partner at Studio 111, Michael's focus has been on repairing communities through architecture, landscape, and urban design. His interest in innovation has resulted in the completion of the first parklets in Southern California, 6 modular housing developments utilizing wood, shipping container and metal stud construction, adaptive reuse of over 3 dozen buildings, including the firm's office in downtown Long Beach, and 5 office-to-housing conversions. Michael co-chairs the Housing Steering Committee for AIA California to identify and respond to housing challenges statewide, ultimately aiming to advance solutions to California's housing issues. Kirk Keller, as Principal and Director of Landscape Architecture at Studio 111, is dedicated to helping cities become more vibrant, livable, and sustainable. With special focus on public realm and urban development projects, Kirk brings nearly 3 decades of experience in facilitating successful outcomes and working directly in partnership with city agencies, community groups, and other organizations to design and implement small and large-scale projects with specific, unique identities. He advocates for innovative design solutions that contribute to furthering equity and sustainable design with a strong sense of place. The project we're talking about today is the Long Beach Airport Renovation and Historic Terminal Preservation Project, completed in 2025. Studio 111's renovation of Long Beach Airport is the culmination of a decade-long partnership with the city, an effort rooted in elevating the airport into a world-class gateway while preserving the easygoing character that makes it unmistakably local. The most recent phase focuses on restoring the historic terminal by peeling back decades of alterations to reveal the clarity and elegance of its original design. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. Today I have Michael Bohn, AIA and Partner, and Kirk Keller, Principal and Director of Landscape Architecture at Studio 111 in Long Beach, California. Place I'd rather be than pouring down rain, Portland, Oregon right now. The project we're talking about today is the 7 years from concept to completion Long Beach Airport renovation, more specifically, the current Phase 3 historic terminal preservation that was completed in 2025. We usually start with kind of an icebreaker question just to get to know something about you. I randomly pick these out of the air. So I'm really involved in CSI, and so I'm always interested to hear about how other people contribute in the industry outside of the day job, which many people do, especially in AEC. So what I'd like to hear from each of you is tell me about one industry activity or association that you participate in and what you do there or how you participate in that organization.
Sure, I can start. So I've been involved with the ASLA, the American Society of Landscape Architects, for many years. Not particularly in one capacity, but just being involved in many different ways, from giving lunchtime presentations at local universities about what's it like to be professional, what kinds of projects do we work on, being on awards juries, giving project reviews and tours of things that we've done locally that have won awards. And then also I was recently able to speak at the national conference, so that was really exciting to represent there.
And I've been involved in the AIA on my local chapter for, over a dozen years. I was on the board for 10 years, and currently I co-chair the California American Institute of Architects Housing Steering Committee. And that's really where we have a group of housing experts trying to loosen up the production of housing in California and still promote good design.
we need that to be going a little faster down there. And in other places as well. It's not just we have we have 2 offices now in California. And so I do a fair amount of work in your state. Kirk, it's funny. I thought about this. So I have spoken at the ASIC National Conference 4 times now. In the last probably 7 or 8 years, COVID put a break in there, and then ended up speaking at an event for Hunter irrigation systems. And so I've made a whole bunch of more new friends in the landscape architecture and irrigation consultant arena that I didn't have before. So I've actually learned a few things from participating in those events, more about that world that I had less exposure to in the past.
Oh, good. I hope you find landscape architects cool people.
Oh, very. As a matter of fact, I am, as a result of one of those people I met there, I am speaking next week at the Lone Star. They're going to kill me. I'm not going to remember this correctly. I think it's Lone Star Irrigation Association. It's the Texas. It's a Texas group. From one of the gentlemen I met from Hunter asked me if I would come speak there about contract documents and why they're important. And so I seem to be staying in that world. And I agreed to go to this. It's a 36-hour round trip continuing ed conference that I'm speaking at, largely because they are so much fun. Just like, sure, I'll come. That'd be great. Anyway,
here's
totally.
a little nugget for you. That Texas is the only state in the U.S. that requires the irrigation designers to stamp their own drawings. Everywhere else, the landscape architect stamps the drawings, but Texas requires the irrigation designer to certify their own drawings.
I did not. You know what else? Texas is a weird place, and please don't come at me. I'm a Cowboys fan, people. Texas also, I asked a recent guest about on a project in Texas about getting your the permitting process and getting your building permit, and they looked at me like I had 6 heads. And it's like, we don't have to do that. And I'm like, well, who is assuring that your buildings are safe? And they're like, well, the designers are. And I was just, my mind was blown that they don't have the same kind of permitting requirements in Texas as they do in other states. So I'm sure I'll probably learn some other different things next week when I'm in Hurst, Texas, talking to them. So let's talk about your project, which is going to be far more interesting. So I understand this has been, sounds like to me, a very complicated project, and that your relationship with the airport spans over a decade and multiple phases. With the meet and greet plaza and historic terminal renovation, phase 3, the most current. Give me a little background on this project as a whole and the client's needs. By the way, I'm really excited for the next time I fly into this airport to see this. So tell me about just some background on this.
I'll start off. The Long Beach Airport is the oldest municipal airport in the state, and it celebrated its 100th year anniversary a few years ago.
Wow.
And in 1941, it built the terminal building that we have today. It was designed by 2 distinguished architects, William Austin and Kenneth Wing. And it is a municipal landmark. And over time, the early days of the airport, you were dropped off at the curb, you walked into the building, you checked in your luggage, you got your ticket, and you walked out the other side of the building, and you were on the field and got onto the plane. Passenger ridership has gone up exponentially since then. The airport had to make additions and improvements, and they added a baggage area behind, I'll call it the plane side, where there's a 12-foot wall. The luggage is secured in there. The building had to have more lighting, and conduit was added, air conditioning was added. And it wasn't done in a very thoughtful way. It wasn't in a very ad hoc way. The airport has to operate every day, and so this work was done very quickly and not very thoughtfully over time. And in addition, the passenger areas had to get enlarged, so they brought in temporary trailers. So you actually entered the building, and then you went into this maze of trailers and waited for your plane. In terms of food options, you had vending machines. It was not a very good experience, and it was very convenient, but not a very good experience. And so, over a dozen years ago, a vision plan was created, and the first phase that really started to transform the airport was a north and south concession. The southern concession, or concourse building that has concessions in it, is known as Concourse A, and then on the northern side is Concourse B. Concourse A really serves the business traveler, and Concourse B serves the leisure traveler. And we were able to design the concession spaces, and what's really nice about them is that nine, let's see, 8 out of 9 are all local from their Long Beach businesses. The same type of food that you can order at their restaurant, you can order at the airport. It's the same price, same food quality. And what I think was what the airport asked us to do was really design these as if you were in their place in the city. And so we brought in the similar materials, similar vibe, and I think that really brings a level of authenticity to the airport that many airports don't have. They have, your standard food and beverage components, and this is really about Long Beach. And I think we worked with Parodies, the food concessionaire, and they worked with us really well and really embrace this idea of capturing the local economy and the spirit of our city. So from there, we started to, we as architects and landscape architects and urbanists, we also looked at the 2 buildings that were designed by HOK, the concourse buildings, and we noticed the ends had a plaza. So once you went through TSA, you came into the plaza, and then you either went into the northern concourse or the southern concourse. And we noticed that both those walls were blank, and there was really a space to walk through. And we said, let's open this up so that the 2 restaurants at each end can have glass doors that open onto the space. People can dine outside and really activate this plaza with people. And that's where Kirk really stepped in. And you might want to talk about some of those improvements and what you did.
Sure. I mean, one of the great things about opening up those walls, for example, on the north side, you've got 4th Street Vine. It's a wine bar. The whole window wall opens up. We did this 15-foot long fire pit. People would get their drink and sit outside. They actually arrived at the airport early just to be outside. It's a very unique experience to be able to wait for your plane. The other conscious decision when they'd modernized the airport was no jetways. So you still walk out to your plane. It's one of the only airports where you can enter from the front and the back of the plane. So if anyone flies in and out of Long Beach and doesn't know, you can always cut to the back of the plane and get on without waiting for everyone on the ramps. I've learned that over the years. But being able to sit outside was really charming, and that became, especially during COVID, the place where everyone wanted to be outside. Even now, unless it's pouring rain, people are outside. The terminals are packed with people as more and more people are traveling again. So that outdoor space is really important. So we wanted to celebrate that. And actually that kind of has worked through all the phases of the project. This quality of outdoor space is critical.
Well, I'll tell you something. It's been quite some time since I've been in that particular airport, but one of the things I always loved was that there was outdoor space. I just, flying feels like it takes forever anymore. And just having an opportunity while you're waiting or waiting on a layover to get out of the crush of all the people and get some fresh air I appreciate that in anywhere I go, and it's very rare in airports. Once you're in, you're in the hamster wheel until you get out.
Well, and especially if you're traveling with young children, service animals, it's just a relief valve.
Oh yeah, luckily my days of traveling with kids are over. Now they can travel with their kids, but definitely with kids, just having a space that they can run around like banshees and burn off some energy before they get on a plane. And, it's better to do it there than on the airplane, you hope. So let's go into more detail on phase 3. Give me a broad description of the scope of phase 3, of what you were asked to design for this particular phase.
Well, there's really two components. There's the meet and greet plaza, which is a landscape component, and then there's the historic terminal building. And the historical terminal building just had been over time really remodeled. There's beautiful tile inside that was carpeted and covered up um, because the baggage claim area had to expand. Originally, it was on axes with the drop off and then walking through the building and getting onto the plane. And that all changed. And what we wanted to do was really bring back that axial relationship, bring clarity. So if someone came, they knew exactly where to get in and where to get out without having to rely on signage. And so it was a lot about subtracting, taking thousands of feet of conduit that were added onto the building for wiring and other needs, and removing that, and HVAC systems, ducting, window air conditioners that were installed in the windows over time. Just this hodgepodge of work that was done randomly, and really bringing it back to its original glory.
Yeah. It was really about less is more. I know that's a big term in architecture. Sometimes it's said less is a bore. This definitely was not boring at all. It was really celebrating that building, about taking all the the things off of it to really reveal its original charm. And the plaza was really that kind of platform to kind of elevate the building back to its original stature of, this is the iconic way of getting into the airport. It's really a jewel box. It's something we really wanted to celebrate. So we actually looked back at historic photos too, and we noticed that back in the day, not only did the DC-3s and DC-10s park right behind the building, but the words Long Beach were spelled on the tarmac in two different ways, in the 40s and again in the 60s. And then as FAA rules changed, the words Long Beach were paved over. So we really wanted to bring that back. So we featured giant Long Beach letters, so you're in Long Beach. You get to experience walking over the letters. Kids love to play them, as well as looking to see that even in the 40s, they started planting palm trees. So we really wanted to celebrate that. They're in the Long Beach Airport logo, so making sure we have kind of the fan palms that are iconic, that really will lead you through Donald Douglas Drive into the airport arrival. And then on either side of the terminal, we flank that with day palms, not Canary Islands. The Canary Islands were actually part of the original photographs, but those are harder to plant and survive these days. So we did day palms to kind of reminisce to that sort of thing. And they basically frame your entrance, whether you're coming or going. And one of the important aspects we wanted to make sure was, when you get to the airport, before you're on your plane, your vacation starts at the curb. So how can we give you that relaxed sense of, I don't have to panic. It's easy to get in, it's easy to get out, and you can really start your adventure like the moment you get out of your car.
And I think for us, when the baggage claim and ticketing were moved out of the original building and put into these new buildings, it gave us a chance to really make the terminal building a gem and an iconic element that could be enjoyed from all four sides. And I think as architects and landscape architects, the space between these buildings to us is just as important as the building itself. And so, as we're working on the buildings and improving them, Kirk's looking at the scale of trees and the ability for people to move around easily. And we didn't want it to be too big where it might feel cavernous when it's not busy, but we didn't want it too small that it felt very tight. And I think we got the proportions really well down on that. And I think nature too, just is another way of landscaping, is another way of calming people and letting them feel more comfortable when they come to an airport. There's a lot of apprehension and stress and anxiety, and this idea of bringing nature to the airport, I think is really helpful in all that.
And rare. What is the other clues besides looking back to the historical photos? Is the other clue that we really wanted to play off of is the kind of the accolades and the awards the airport won in phase 1. We considered one of the top 10 in the world as the most beautiful airport experience, and it kept getting these accolades. And the only negative feedback the airport got was, well, how can someone who doesn't have a ticket experience the air side in that same way? And so we really wanted to bring that experience all the way to the curb. So there's a very a strong sense of consistency. It looks like one firm did everything, even though it was all different types of consultants involved over the last decade and plus. But really, that consistent experience is whether you're arriving or departing. So that level of quality was really important too.
So, as you may or may not know, Portland also just not all that long ago opened our latest phase. They've been working on that airport since I was a kid. But this latest huge, with all the mass timber ceilings, I've done a couple interviews on that project. One of the things that I actually went back and looked at some of the questions I asked just to remind myself of some of the things about an airport. But one of the things that I found very interesting when I did that interview that led to my next question for you was one of the unique things they had to do in a working airport was get a new building permit every single day. A new
Wow.
approved permit every single day while they were putting in all those ceilings and everything. So this went on for months. And part of that was because the airport had to be open. It had to be operational. They're bringing in ginormous pieces of wood ceiling while people are coming through. And this is all in the entrance area. I'm curious, what special considerations you had to make in your planning for this project, assuming that this, especially since I know it's become only busier and busier in that part of the country. I'm assuming you had to keep the airport largely completely operational, even if you
Fully
had
up.
certain sections blocked off. So how did that affect your planning and programming? What did you have to think about?
Well, it was interesting in terms of landscape architecture. The Meet and Greet Plaza was one project amongst many. The airport named them components. So actually, from a landscape architecture standpoint, we work on multiple components at the same time. It was called Component 4. There was Component 3A and B, Component 5. Some of them were streetscape improvements that we did. Some of them were future phases. So knowing that they were going to break it up into multiple phases of construction as well as phases of actual completion over time really helped us to kind of keep the big picture at the same time as working on how do you divide all this up. So they did 7 components and 9 construction phases. So really, really complicated in terms of knowing how your work's going to get cut up in the field and then it eventually seamed all back together again. And obviously keeping the airport running. They did a lot of construction at night, a lot of a little bit here and then moved barrier a little bit there, keeping circulation and ADA clearances and things like that, bringing stuff in on site, off site. But also like you have to build something new before you can take the old thing away. So as the more the project was advancing, you saw a lot of things happening, but it didn't look like things were being eliminated necessarily until finally they could take the things off and take it down and take certain things offline because the other parts were up and running. So it's a process of patience to see it revealed.
Yeah, and you mentioned Portland, and you're probably aware the Washington Post rated the top 50 airports in the country, and Portland was rated number 1. And proudly, we're rated number 2. And our mayor said the other day, well, and we didn't have to spend $2 billion on the project on our airports to get there. So I think we're all very proud. We really respect the Portland airport. It's a beautiful airport, but we're a gritty little city with maybe not as much funding available, and so we're very proud to be number 2.
Well, yeah, we're people even try to sniff that we're not going to be number 1, and we start getting uptight, and they start looking at another project to do at the airport. We do love our airport, but it's also an international airport, and we're flying all over the world, and it takes like 4 years to walk from the front door to wherever your plane is. I mean, you are getting your steps in at the Portland airport to get through everything and down these long concourses, which is not always fun if you're hauling around bags. But I don't know. I love airports. I don't want to hang out in them. But, just traveling is so much fun that both leaving and arriving is Your first thing you do is you walk into that airport, and I love how it's almost becoming a competition among
Yes,
airports, not just in the US, all over the world.
For
You go
sure.
look at some of these airports in like China or Japan, and they're doing things that none of us have even thought about touching. Um,
Building faults
yeah,
for runways.
especially in the landscape
Yeah,
arena.
spending a lot more money, and yeah, it's a really substantial civic space. People flying in all over the world.
Now, if they could just make that same experience on the airplanes instead of, I remember when you actually like had hot food on an airplane, and I'm not going to date myself. Okay, off track again.
Well, and I think talking about the future of airports and even our little Long Beach airport, this idea of we are an arts and cultural city, and so we're starting to uh, talk with many of the cultural institutions within the city and having a presence there. So one example is in our downtown, where our office is right now. There's an emerging design district that is flourishing, and we recently had a call for artists worldwide on what is Long Beach about. And we had hundreds of submissions, and the winning submissions were actually shown at the Long Beach airport on their video screen. So this idea of connecting the culture of the city already at the airport. So when a passenger disembarks and comes into our city and already understands that this is about the culture, the arts, we're a laid back city. I think, and to Kirk's point, that your vacation starts when you get off the curb is really really important and brings a level of authenticity and uniqueness to our airport.
I would,
And you not get your steps in walking for 4 days to get your plane, but there are fun things like you can play pickleball in the plaza. They activate it on Thursdays. Fridays, they have a concert series. You may be serenaded by, acoustic guitar and singing as you come through the secure side. So they're always activating it. It's definitely a unique experience to be able to play pickleball or catch a concert, at the airport.
well, Long Beach itself has changed a lot. I was last time I was in Long Beach was right before COVID. CSI had their national convention there, and
Mm.
I hadn't been there in a really long time, and I was blown away. Like, where did all this stuff come from? I mean, just I had a blast when I was in Long Beach, and there was so much to do, and um, so I think you needed that for your airport, and it just adds to the charm of Long Beach altogether. So, from what I've seen, again from the Portland Airport project, there are a whole lot of cooks in the kitchen from different arenas, sometimes multiple architects, all kinds of specialty consultants we don't use on your average building project, security concerns, multiple layers of stakeholders. Um, how do you corral all of that to keep your project? I'm fascinated and always have been because I'm an efficiency freak. It's just really important to me to have everything lined up and moving. How do you what are your best practices for corralling all of that and keeping the project moving and getting the decisions made?
Well, I think having a simple big idea is very important in getting your client to agree with that. And at the Long Beach airport, they have consistently held on to those ideas. We've worked with 5 different directors over this time frame, and it's so easy to politically just go in a different direction or for someone to make their own mark. And fortunately, everybody has said this makes sense. We're on board. So I think having that big idea and then making sure everybody else understands that, and that every decision has to go back to, is it supporting or is it ebbing away the big idea? And I know that sounds very simplistic, but I think it's really important to take the time and to bring everybody on board on what we're trying to achieve, which in this case has been, a decade. So
And it was important for us to know who the decision makers were. So even like the first kickoff meeting, we said, please, airport, bring everybody who needs to be at the table. And I think we were a team of 4 or 5, and 32 people came from the airport in the city. So we heard everything from director to engineers to managers to operations and maintenance. Like, what are all the concerns we need to know before we even start? And even in that process, we wanted to talk about what does the airport want to be and what not does it what does it not want to be, just so we're all aligned, so we're really being effective in what we're doing, and then again having consistent input and kind of keeping the big idea. We would go back to that time and time again, and that was an easy thing to do.
I have to say, Michael, you kind of blew my mind there for a minute when you said that you've been through 5 directors and you've stayed on track. Do you know how you have to know how incredibly rare that is? First part of my career, I did a lot of schoolwork, and you'd be mid design on a project and they'd get a new superintendent, and it was always, almost every single time, hard stop. Wait, I want to do something different because now this is my legacy. That's kudos to Long Beach. I mean, and lucky for you that they maintained and stuck with that plan, which is a smart move, but that's not always easy for people to do, especially with a large group of stakeholders involved. So, wow, I'm amazed at that.
And we had multiple architects working with us, and obviously, architects all have their own egos and ideas. So it was also corralling them, and I think that's the long-term value we brought to this project, is just being involved for so many years and providing that consistency and that reminder. And that doesn't mean we can't change course, but as long as it supports the big idea and doesn't detract from it. Right.
So before we get into more specifics about the building itself, I've got one more question, because there might be rumors about permitting in California and how there's a lot of really great things about California, one being a much more sustainable state than many. But with this higher level of expectation for your buildings becomes a higher level of process to get a building permitted. What did the permitting process look like for, again, you've got an airport that's got to stay working, multiple phases, multiple players. How was that process?
Actually, for us and the city of Long Beach, it was pretty similar to a different public sector or even private sector project. We submitted for individual phases and individual buildings, but such as the terminal building, it was one submission, and it ran fairly consistently with other projects that we've done in the city. So I can't really speak to anything from a permitting perspective that was unique or challenging, and maybe that's a gold star for the city of Long Beach. Because of the scale of our city being almost 500,000 people, I think we're not quite as removed from all the departments, that they still talk to each other, they still meet with each other, and generally there's a rowing in the same direction. And so I think that was very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it could also be not just a kudos for the city of Long Beach, which it is, because I've heard some stories, particularly more in the Los Angeles area. But also kudos for, I'm guessing, the amount of coordination and communication you had with the city early on.
And previous experience with the different departments certainly helped.
Yeah. We know every council member in the city. We know every department head. Our headquarters is here, so we're as integrated almost within the city as we are, outside the community. So.
I tell people all the time, you really want to do a project well, it's going to be about the relationships. Yes. You'll get the work done and you'll get where you need to go.
Right.
But the relationships are going to define how that process goes. And that affects the finished project in the end.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, being aligned with visions, what our vision is for the airport, the airport's vision, you need an alignment. And, a little bit about our company, we're at Studio 111, our focus isn't on any one particular typology. You're not going to see a portfolio of one type of building. It's really when a potential project comes in, the question in our mind is how is this building a better city, or how is this building a better place or better community? And if it checks 3 or 4 of our criteria, then we're all in. And if it doesn't, it just might not be the right alignment for us and for that client. So we say no to a lot of projects that just we don't think maybe best serves the client or us.
I respect that. I really do. Not everybody does that. I mean, there are people that do, and there are people that don't. But I think at the end of the day, I know people are going to think this sounds weird. This is a bit of an emotional business.
Oh, it is.
It's very artistic. People's heart and soul goes into, regardless of the type of project it is. You're trying to make that space better or build this beautiful space for whoever's going to be exposed to it for many years to come. And that matters to the people that work in this business. And so I really respect the firms that work on the projects that align with their firm ethos or goals or the mark they want to leave on the world. So let's start talking about this building. Melding older construction with new is always challenging. I don't care what type of project it is. Some of the most hilarious stories I've ever heard, or crazy things they've found, or challenges that they had to face for things you didn't expect to find. Tell me a little bit more technically about what you had to work with here at this project, and any kind of unique elements that you had to tackle in following your path, but having to, you don't have a blank slate here.
Right, right. Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse because you have this beautiful building and you want to respect it, but at the same time, you do have a lot of constraints and guidelines put on you. And you know, we replaced all the systems in the building, the air conditioning, the heating, the cooling, and ventilation, as well as seismic upgrades, and that was a big deal. And so the basement, the first floor and second floor have new and added strengthened shear walls, which in many areas require 12 inches of additional concrete to an adjacent wall. So you have to think about how the spaces will shrink over time, the impact of breaking through the floors to make sure that shear wall is continuous from the basement to the uh, second floor. And then there's actually 2 floors above that and a control tower, which has a Moomin frame steel system. And so that had to be integrated on top. And the third floor, which has some offices in it, has a very low ceiling height. And so when we added in this Moomin frame, we're talking about inches of clearance. We have some brace frames that uh, had to drop down to the point where if we had sprayed the steel with fire protection, a door couldn't have been put into that under that frame because it would have been too low. So we used intumescent paint to fireproof it, and we got an aesthetic approach that we liked as well. That the steel was exposed; it wasn't sprayed with the foam. But that was a really careful integration of trying to keep all the rooms still functional, but at the same time making sure this building could sustain a serious earthquake. I think one other area too was this idea of the chases for the mechanical systems going through and breaking through the floors to allow for those systems to go through, or working within the existing chases. We found out that between floors there was no fire stopping. So if there was a fire in the basement near a chase that was penetrating up 3 floors, that fire would just go right up through there. So we had to look at each condition was unique. It had its own solutions. In some areas we used metal plates, in other areas we used drywall, in other areas we had to use fire stopping. Um, we just had to look at each condition as its own project and its own challenge. But in the long run, it was a lot of fun.
And then from landscape challenge, we had and we really wanted the plaza to feel really clean and open, but we had all kinds of infrastructure to work with, from grease interceptors that you know were going to be in the plaza, and there are certain things you could do and not do around them, catch basins, utilities. We even had backflows and detector checks that were for the whole project, so we couldn't move them. They were existing in place. It would cost way too much to move them, so we just had to incorporate them into the design. Uh, and again, at the end of the day, nobody, the average person doesn't see any of this stuff. So the challenge is how do you integrate it without drawing any attention to it?
I think where we melded this architectural challenge and landscape challenge nicely are there's two service ramps that go down into the basement. They're very just their circulation. It's really for back of house use, but at the time they were very prominent, and I think we created a landscape bed in front of it that now has lush landscaping, kind of evocative of the 40s era of the building. But most importantly, it screens those ramps. So they're still functional ramps, service ramps, but the average visitor, they really have to look now
Yeah.
as the landscaping has matured and grown in to see that they're there. It's about, again, simplifying and subtracting things and really celebrating the uniqueness and simplicity of the building and the plaza and adjacent buildings.
And because all the stuff that was on the back of the building was taken off and we revealed those ramps, now you could see that right out the windows when you're sitting inside this terminal building. So we also made sure that any sort of fall protection, we used cable rail so you could see right through it. And eventually those plants will get up. So you're kind of looking through plants, just above the windowsill height into the plaza. So it's a great way of kind of softening the foreground.
Something came up in a completely Florida project that I did an interview on recently, so I'm going down a rabbit hole again. When it came to the landscaping design and the plaza design, I'm curious, were there any special considerations? Because this was something that came up on accident in this other interview, and so and it was just something I never thought about thinking about before. But any special considerations in your landscape and plaza design related to the uniqueness of any weather or earthquakes or those kinds of things in Long Beach that you had to think about?
In, in
Water.
term in terms of weather and water, everything is drought tolerant. We have assembly bills that require low water use. Even before that came into fruition, we were always designing towards drought tolerance and using local and native plants as much as we could, but really kind of making sure that the plants were easy to maintain, gave you that seasonal interest year round. I can talk more about some of the species and the colors and things like that, but really it's flowering at all times of the year. The textures and the colors of the plant material actually play off the airport logo, which has yellows and blues and whites and greens. So if you came in the, kind of at the end of fall, early winter, you'll see the aloes with the yellow flower stalks, which plays off the yellow of the logo. Uh, the blue kind of is in some of the furniture on the secure side, kind of talking about kind of the ocean and the sky. We use palm trees because they're really effective, especially the date palms. Really is really great for shade in some of the hotter months of the year, so people can sit underneath them and get that shade. And you don't need a lot of infrastructure to provide shade when you have trees. But at the same time, we couldn't use canopy trees because of nesting birds being by the airport. So palms are a great choice there. And then in terms of earthquakes or heavy winds like the Santa Anas that we get, um, we actually have the Mexican fan palm as well as the California fan palm, and both of those have such fibrous roots and they grow tall and thin that the wind just goes right past them, and they don't really have any sort of major issues with kind of being damaged by high winds. So that was one thing. The other thing is we have a catenary lighting system over the entire plaza, so we avoided having multiple poles and things like that, keeping it flexible, but also that it's spanning almost 185 feet in certain directions with one mid-span pole. But also, how do you connect all these buildings together with cables and then allowing them to detach in a major seismic event? So that was all considered as well. And that was a pretty technical and tricky detail.
And the bird nesting is a serious issue because birds and plane engines don't get along. They don't play well together. So it's interesting when you get off the airplane and you're in this very lush environment. I have listened, and you don't hear any birds. You have to make sure you have the right planting to avoid or at least minimize the damage or potential conflict with the airport.
Yeah, I know it's a huge issue at the Portland airport. They've done all kinds of things and they continue to have problems. It seems like no matter what they do, it's not still not working to the level,
Yeah.
but we also don't, we're Portland, we're West Coast, we don't want to kill a bunch of birds either, so they're trying to find ways
Right.
to deter them without hurting them. I think that's a work in progress, probably still.
Well, and it's really hard to really control their patterns of flight. I mean, their migration patterns, but that can change, and they may want to go somewhere else for the day. So
Yeah, no, that's true.
it's unpredictable.
So we just talked about this some, and so I'm not sure whether there's more, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So the site and the site work. So this is a 1.6 acre plaza. If what I read is correct, because apparently I
That's right.
read something wrong about when this thing was in construction when I was writing my questions, and a 1/4 mile of streetscape. Tell me about that design.
Sure. So kind of going back to the idea of those different components, we were able to kind of design the plaza and the streetscapes at the same time. Something pretty unique was the historic terminal has a slight contour to the front of the building, and the curb follows that kind of curve. But eventually, we knew that in future phases or future components, that curb needed to straighten out to actually lengthen its ability for cars to stack for drop off. So while we're designing the plaza, we know we're working with this curve, but eventually it's going to be straightened out. So the plaza design incorporated the curve, and the streetscape design incorporated the straight curb. So how do you design it to look like, oh, as soon as that curve goes away, it looks like it's always been straight. So we really tried to emphasize kind of this idea of kind of almost like a hug, like come on in. And the new buildings, the ticketing building and the baggage claim both have kind of curved facades as well. So we kind of played off of that. It didn't necessarily match with the curves of the terminal building, but we basically tried to create one giant arc that would go from north to south and really embrace both the new buildings and kind of situate the terminal building. And then that's where the three palm trees on either side came in. Again, keeping it as flexible as possible. The catenary lighting is kind of evocative of flight patterns and having all these crisscrossing cables and just having lighting that's subtle above you. And then having lighting in the palm trees as well. Again, minimizing the number of fixtures we have. We did seating around the palms, so it's a great place to kind of sit and wait for somebody or just enjoy some downtime, download your boarding pass. But even the consciously just making sure that all the elements really kind of evoked not only Long Beach itself, but kind of this idea of the airport. So even the design, the benches have what they call a skirt, so the top wraps down the sides, and it's kind of evocative of an engine cowling that goes over the front of the engine. So everything kind of has these real subtle nods to aviation. We'd mentioned the Long Beach letters. That was really, really important, kind of bring those back into the plaza. And then this axis is really striking too, because every picture from 1941 and on, you see this terminal. The axis goes right through the building. So we kind of maintained that as well, even in future phases, thinking about how does that access even go from beyond the airport all the way towards kind of where you enter into the kind of the whole airport property. So that was really something we wanted to do. And then also knowing that we were going to expand and shift the streetscape meant that all the palm trees that were kind of this iconic, relaxed welcome into the airport were going to be gone. So we fought really hard to put them back. It's really difficult to transplant large, tall palm trees. It's really not that cost effective. So we ended up just planting new ones of various heights, so it looked random and relaxed. But we made that conscious effort to bring those back, and then really just we didn't really do a whole lot around the terminal building itself. We of course planted where those the ramps were at the bottom, but really on the sides and the front, we kept it really, really minimal.
Was there any? I don't recall seeing this in the description. Any? Did you have to do any work to the traffic flow, the parking or drop off areas, or that kind of thing, or did what you do to the building work with what was there?
The streetscape improvements definitely were about traffic flow. The issues they were having is that when the curve was in place, there was a lot of stacking beyond just kind of the front of the airport. So lengthening that allowed us to have more people dropping off, but they also separated out drop off and pickup from rideshare. And so before it was just kind of whoever gets to the curb first wins, and now it's kind of stay in your lane. Everybody kind of knows where to go. It's much more peaceful. It's way easier to cross across the street if you're parked in the parking structure. So some of those modernizations of just, traffic flow, signalizing the crosswalks, everybody kind of knows where to go. It's really important. Obviously, we kept the visual access to the terminal building, so that's clear. But the way you get into the airport to ticketing or baggage is on either end, so you're clear of that center spot, which is where everyone wants to park.
I'm glad because I remember that chaos when I was there before. It's like,
Old chaos now. Some drivers get it and some are newer.
oh, it's always chaos. It doesn't matter the airport or how well they try to control it. There's always some kind of chaos. So I think we've covered most of this, but I always like to ask about challenges and how you solved them. So I'm going to change this one up just a little bit. Can you tell me about one unique challenge to the landscaping, into that part of the work in the plaza, that you faced and how you solved it?
Sure. Just before I talk about the challenge that we overcame, I wanted to just mention that oftentimes when people talk about the landscape, they think about the planting. And really, as landscape architects, we're looking at basically everything outside the building, from roadway improvements to alignments of things, lighting. We designed all the site lighting as well. So everything was brought into play in terms of that. And so thinking about security for the airport, people getting dropped off. Again, in 1941, no one was worried about a FedEx truck, loaded with explosives trying to do something funny or dangerous. So really, we wanted to downplay kind of the visual quality of barricades. And so we were able to kind of play off the design of the lighting. Some of the original lighting in phase one, we did pull into the project, and those are this really clean Bakelite lights, charcoal gray, very, very simple. So we played off that design, and the security along the front of the curb was designed knowing that the curb would come out to be straighter. And really, they're very strong, simple, kind of they look like miniature I-beams with a cap on them. But really, I think that was going through all the K ratings and understanding kind of clearances and distances and spacings, making sure we have lighting at the curb. So we do have those Bakelite lights out along the curb, but then in between, we've got all these security ballers. And I think it works really well. You wouldn't really pull up to the airport and say, wow, this is barricaded and it's an impenetrable force. It looks quite welcoming and open.
It does. It does not give that vibe of, a blockade at all. I'm looking at that particular picture right now. So I love being able to look at it as you're describing it. Um, and thank you for clarifying that about landscape. You worked in this business for a long time. We all know when you talk about landscape that it's not just about the plantings, but we have people from all industries, all walks of life that listen, and they may not realize that basically everything that happens outside, no matter what's going on, is if it's not a building structure, is going to be handled by the landscape architects or the civil consultants,
Right.
or them together.
For sure.
So that was a good clarification.
I think too that even the hardscape that Kirk had specified, there was a certain level of reflectivity that we wanted to stay under so that it was very comfortable. Southern California is very sunny, and sometimes it can be very uncomfortable to walk on a hard surface. And we were limited to the amount of trees and shading we could provide. So this looking at the reflectivity of the concrete was also very important. So and also so it wouldn't heat up as well. So um, and then I think on the inside of the building, we in 2012 when they removed the carpeting, there was this tile work that was done during the WPA era by a female artist named Grace Clements, and she had installed 1.6 million tiles in the lobby. And that had all been forgotten because it was carpeted in the 60s, and as new folks came in, the tiles were forgotten. And so when in 2012, when some of that was pulled up, we still had no idea when we started working on the terminal building when the back baggage area was available to be removed, and the tile was discovered back there that there were 9 vignettes celebrating navigation, communication, aviation, related to Long Beach and leisure and entertainment, and um, they were all in really pretty good shape. And so we did work with the historic consultant not only on the tile but on the building. His name is John Thomas. He specializes in Art Deco, Streamline Moderne buildings. In particular, he's spent a lot of time on the Queen Mary, which is another beloved icon in our city of a similar era. And so we work very closely with him to restore those tiles. And in fact, where tiles were missing, we thought, well, let's put in a tile that looks similar to it. And he said, no, we have to contrast it. What's new is new and what's old is old. And we need to be very clear that we're that happens in buildings and we need to identify that. So that was a really interesting and fun process. I think I mentioned earlier we had created new chases and new structural systems, and so the floors, were concrete in other parts of the building, particularly the west-facing original lounge area where people would sit and wait for the plane to arrive and then walk out onto the tarmac. We preserved as much of the colored concrete finish as we could, but we had to try to match that so that it looked continuous and with the new concrete pours, and that was quite an interesting challenge as well. Um, Also in that back lounge area, they had dropped the ceilings down to bring in more systems, and we were able to lift that up by 2 feet so that the windows along the edge would bring in natural light into the space and made it as bright and inviting as it used to be. So, and at the same time, the original building wasn't air conditioned very well, and we did drop in some round soffits to accommodate AC so that it's a very much more comfortable environment than even when it was originally being used. So, um, trying to pull in new things, but making sure they related to the history. And we've had a lot of people that have said, thank you for saving everything. There's even an original 1941 clock that we were able to find someone to repair it, and it now works again. There's original diffusers inside the concourse that we were able to reuse to distribute heat and air. And I think reusing those elements and integrating them into the building was really important. And I think at the same time, the new work that we did for the car rentals is very simple. It's very subdued. We try to use mostly low counters so that sight lines for security as well as just bouncing light around was important, and for clarity to get to the airport or to the drop off area easily and quickly. So again, just a light touch and just as much thought as going into a new building, but just being very conscious about what we had in place to work with.
Well, you just triggered another question in my head that I don't know why it didn't occur to me before. But this is a historic project. Did you have any special requirements to meet with a California Historic Preservation Agency, or is it not tagged in that way?
Well, since it's a city landmark, we were able to use a local preservation consultant to help guide us, and it was really helpful. We On the west side, when the baggage claim area was eliminated, a third of the windows, or the frames were there, but the glass was missing because conduit was punched through, or they were broken, or air conditioners were put in their place, and so we had to replace that glass. And it's interesting because glass installed today looks very different from glass that was put in 1941. So it looked very hodgepodgey in a way, and so we also wanted to put a film on the glass because it's west facing, lots of light, but also a lot of heat, and so we were able to specify various film grades of gray that brought more consistency to the glass. So the glazier wasn't particularly thrilled on putting different tints on different types of glass, but in the long run, it helped bring a more unified look to that west facade. And one other item I wanted that just triggered in my mind is that most of the doors going in and out are sliding doors that uh, a customer doesn't have to touch the doors; they just get close to it and they open up. But because of the west facade and the faceted windows, the sliding doors, according to the preservationists, would have been out of line because they preferred swinging doors to continue that faceted look. And the sliding doors would have been an 8-foot wide continuous line across the facade, whereas when you have the two swinging doors, it's two 4-foot doors, and so we could still work with that facet a little more thoughtfully. So it was a real good back and forth of looking at the facade very thoughtfully with our consultant that made it a lot of fun.
And it's a very interesting experience to come in the north and south side with the sliders, but then to be able to walk into the plaza with the doors opening up. So it's kind of another way of saying, come outside. It's a different experience, but it all goes together.
Well, I'm really glad that you did not get rid of all of those historic features. I think that would have been a travesty with just what this building is. That's, I'm looking at what kind of tile is that? The old tile.
It's 1-inch mosaic tile,
Okay.
1-inch square mosaic tile, all hand cut by the artist Grace Clements.
It would have just been like if I would have heard about it and you were taking it out, I would have cried. I mean, there's certain things I think you need that because you really have done a beautiful job of blending the old with the new and keeping that charm and keeping what makes any historic building special, but making it a modern working airport that people want to be in that feel it's full of light, it looks comfortable. I've been in that airport, I know what it used to look like. It looks amazing. um,
And kudos to the airport for seeing how much value they already had and just making sure that was preserved and getting the contractor on board and the right subcontractors did the job really, really well. I mean, it took its heat.
Yeah.
it always does. So you used a term I had never heard before, and so I threw this in here because I didn't know what the heck it meant. And you just mentioned it a minute ago, so I'm going to ask this question now. What exactly is a streamline modern landmark? And why is it called that? I saw that and I'm like, okay, I've been around for a while. I've never, ever heard that. I thought it was a special name just for this building.
Well, it's the term landmark means that this building is a landmark,
Right.
but Streamline Moderne is an architectural style. It came up after Deco. Art Deco was more ornamental and had many times medallions and very curvilinear layers of design, uh, which was inspired by Art Nouveau. So going backwards, it was inspired from the early 20s and even before then. But then Streamline Moderne is slightly before the mid-century modern movement. It's the elimination of as much detail as possible, but still celebrating the sensual curves of a building, which this building has, large canopies. There's a nod towards nautical with the round porthole windows that you see in the building. So, but it's very, very simple style itself, and it was really occurring kind of pre-war, post-war, right in that brief period of time, and then the country then kind of shifted towards mid-century modern, which is a whole different style. So it's a very unique moment in time, and worth saving. And so it's a long-winded answer. It's an architectural style.
Well,
I
clear.
would add to that too that, even though from a distance it looks very clean, it has an awful lot of detail and texture to it. I mean, from how the canopies are detailed, there's a porte cochere on the south side. Even when you get up to the front, you notice that the bottom half of the walls are board formed concrete, but they're all kind of contiguous in color. But there's some really beautiful subtle detailing that was well preserved.
And that canopy really is pretty impressive. It's concrete and it spans out 12 feet. So when you disembark from the car, you're quickly under either shade or if it rains, under some covering, and over time they added new lighting to it, fluorescent fixtures that were just surface mounted with conduit running across, and it was a mess. And so we came back in and installed the can lights and then ran the conduit on top of the canopy as opposed to underneath it, so it's invisible to the user. And we thought the can lights just brought a very simple, uh, again, being round, relationship to the building than these rectangular surface mounted fluorescent lights. So again, it's just trying to think about what would the architect have done, now if they had a chance to relook at their own building, 70 years later.
The architect, if they came back and looked at it now, I mean, before you redid it, probably would have had a heart attack. Wait a minute.
They probably would tear it down. What have you done?
So tell me a little bit about your interior aesthetics. What is the vibe inside, and maybe highlight a couple of unique products you used or materials.
Well, I think again, getting that baggage area out of the building and bringing back the lounge was really important. And I talked about raising the ceiling 2 feet to bring it in more light and air, but at the same time, where the lounge area is, we had to drop the ceiling down and had the curvilinear soffits, and those soffits provide the air flow to the windows that's needed. But at the same time, those soffits define that lounge seating area, which we thought was really important. And um, we weren't sure how much use that lounge would get because usually people, when they get to the airport, the first thing they want to do is get through TSA and then they can relax and get food or sit down. But because our TSA lines are no more than 5 to 10 minutes, that lounge area gets a tremendous amount of use. And it does it not only from passengers that are deep uh, leaving the airport, but also people that are waiting to pick up people. They might not want to just wait in the car. They might park their car and come in. And so that lounge area has gotten a lot of use. And
We've even seen pilots have their lunch before they get onto their flight. They just basically just they're chilling in the lounge like everybody else.
and I think where the seating is there, the airport has put in historic images of the airport, and it tells a very brief teaser story about the airport. And then if you'd like more information, on the second floor is a very detailed, almost museum level of history to the airport. So it's a nice way of being a billboard to say, here's what we were. And then if you want to know more, please go upstairs. I think this idea of bringing in an educational component has been really nice as well.
And if you're able to get upstairs, you can get upstairs regardless if you take the stairs or your elevator. But the interesting thing is once you're upstairs, you get to have a view back from where you came from or out to the airfield. So it's a very unique perspective. And a lot of the protective guardrails were all maintained as just glass. So if you get out to look at the edges there, you can see right into the plaza and you can see your planes coming and going.
I appreciate you didn't go full blown nautical theme, which is so common in so many places anywhere near the ocean. And yeah,
It's funny that it's funny that you raise that point because we initially weren't the first architect for the concessionaires in the concourse building where we were putting in these restaurants. And the reason why we were selected is that the initial architect did go all in on this nautical Streamline Moderne, and you can't create the same details, those authentic details that were done, 85 years ago, and it looked very pastiche. And credit to the city that they said, this just doesn't feel like us. And this is maybe where we could bring a local architect that understands their city better. And so, thank you for bringing that up because it could have happened if it wasn't for the vision of our city folks.
yeah, I'm looking, I've been to Long Beach and I'm hearing you talk about the project and looking at this building, and it popped in my head about 5 times while we were talking so far. Thank God they don't have anchors and buoys and, stuff everywhere. Again, I'm a minimalist, so I don't like a whole lot of over decorated, over busy kind of things, but I really do think you captured the vibe of Long Beach much better this way than you would have in that, if they had done that kind of theme. So, are there any unique materials you used inside or outside that you'd like to highlight? I've heard of people using some crazy things, maybe normal things, but in crazy ways. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a material that in itself is unique, but you use like I think what you did with the tiles is great. How you mix the old with the new, to keep that history, but still, you know, incorporate a newer material. Is there anything else that you'd like to highlight in that arena that makes the space special?
In terms of the building or just in general?
Building or outside. I mean, there's a
Okay.
kind of like two halves to this project.
Well, I think the lighting was a mess. I mentioned under the canopy there were these rectangular fluorescent light fixtures that had conduit running all over the place, and that was on the inside as well. And we went back working with our lighting designer to conceal all the new lighting in these light coves that are LED lights. So they're much less in terms of energy usage, but at the same time, just not showing the light, actually just hiding the light source and having the light there, but hiding the light source itself because we thought it would just um, compete too much or distract too much from the simplicity of the streamlined modern style. So um, I think lighting was a really carefully laid out approach, and again, hiding the source, but making sure there was ample light so that the building felt fresh and bright and happy, and not maybe a dark grandma or grandparent museum or house or something like that, stodgy and stale. We wanted it to be a little more crisp. And I think also on the outside of the building, our previous mayor had said, we want to, he always wanted Long Beach blue somewhere in there. That's our city color. And so we incorporated it in the neon on the canopy itself and on the edge of the building so that at night neon is something that could have and would have been used during this era. And so that was something else that we did add to the building.
I was gonna say, just in terms of lighting, the catenary lighting, we were very particular about how it was mounted. So it's direct mount right onto the cable, so nothing hanging. Uh, and then we had a very, just like Michael was working with, a very kind of limited ceiling height. We had a limited height in terms of how high our lights could be and still be effective, but they couldn't be low enough that the average person could jump up and just smack them. So trying to find the right shroud height, direct mounting, and then being able to attach to the canopy heights. We just worked with all those factors to make sure it was kind of at the right datum line and make sure it was comfortable enough, but not, too low.
Twinkle lights are always great outside anyway. I'm curious, and I'm not exactly sure which space I'm looking at here, but it's an interior shot. I think this might be the lounge that you're talking about, but I might be wrong. There's this tile floor and there's this blue running through it. You've got these vents in the ceiling.
Yeah.
Okay, you know the spot I'm talking about?
Yeah, the large circular.
Yeah, the large circle. Yeah. I just thought that was, I wrote specs in MEP for 6.5 years at one point in my career. And so I've got a little exposure in that arena as well. And I just thought that was a really unique way to have those there and have them not look utilitarian.
Yeah,
I mean,
those are original. And what was interesting is that they weren't, at some point, they were disconnected and not used. Other venting was used. And so when we first started, somebody made the comment, well, let's just get rid of those and put modern venting in. And we said, well, let's see if we can bring modern ducts to these diffusers and see if they work. And they actually work really quite well.
oh
So
gosh, that was
they're not only they're not only decorative, but they're functional as well.
such a better decision because they look like a very purposeful fixture. that you put there on purpose. And again, maintaining that old but making it new. I just kept glancing back at this picture as you were talking about the tile and flipping around in the pictures. And I just thought, what a unique way to do that. And not lose that piece. It would have been such a more boring ceiling
Mm.
otherwise.
It's an interesting point you raised. The ceiling and the floors are actually the most interesting part of the whole interiors, and so it was important for us to keep that, but then not compete with the walls. Just let them be pretty basic, and let the windows let in the light. Let the views be what they are towards the landscape and towards the plains, and not make this all about architecture.
Well, oftentimes floors and ceilings don't get as much attention as they should.
Yeah.
Depending on the type of building, or systems, MEP systems. We have all this equipment and wiring and ducts and conduits and all the pieces and parts that we have to incorporate into every building. And there are some pretty creative ways to deal with that and not have it. Nothing drives me more insane than if I'm in a higher rise building and I look down at a building lower than me and all I see is a roof full of mechanical units. Drives me nuts. I mean, it's just, it's such an eyesore usually. And there are, and you're thinking, oh, the people in the building, nobody's going to see that because they're not doing a roof deck. But no, guess what? The person in the building next to it is seeing it. And it takes away from the just overall aesthetic of the area, from any view. So I gotta say that I love to see when people pay more attention to those systems in their design rather than just the functionality of it, but also that there is a aesthetic value and there is ways to make these things not be an eyesore and be a part of the overall aesthetics of the space or the building. Okay, you're in California. I have to ask this question. If you were in some other part of the country, I might not, but were there any sustainability goals on this project? I'm assuming
sure.
in California, you just had some things that were required, but what were you? I know a lot of people are not necessarily going after lead points all the time anymore. Some are. What were you doing on this project as far as sustainability goes?
So the ticketing building, which was done by another architect, Corgan, that was actually going after LEED Gold. And tied to that was the site area, which included the plaza. So that portion, which is basically the south side of the historic terminal, really kind of influenced the entire plaza because that's kind of where we started. So we were, obviously taking very special attention to the planting choices, the irrigation system, but all the way down to kind of the SRI values of the hardscape, making sure that we, again, like Michael had mentioned before, making sure that it could stay comfortable, wouldn't have too much heat effect. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure it felt like light and beachy, so we tried to find the tan ranges. So natural concrete that's gray is low to mid 30s in terms of SRI number, and we were kind of mid to high 40s. We could have gone higher, but the challenge there is you want to go higher to create even more value, but the lighter your concrete, the more wear and tear you're going to see as people are dragging their luggage back and forth. So we try to find the right compromise between those, the functionality as well as the sustainability factor. But then, I mean, Michael can talk more about the building being sustainable because worked with what you had.
Yeah, the greenest building is the one you save. And
Exactly.
we did learn that we saved the original windows, the structure. You saw so many of the finishes, and our it, if we were to tear this down and rebuild it, we by saving the building and adaptively reusing it, our embodied carbon was 78% lower. So that's quite an improvement in the millions of tons of debris that would have gone into a dump. All that's been avoided.
Well, and I'm sure it probably even goes beyond that because you save so much just by doing adaptive reuse as opposed to tearing it down. But you also have new systems. All your
Uh-huh.
systems are new, so that's obviously going to be far more efficient, energy efficient than whatever the building had back in the day. Um, so, that all contributes to, I am becoming a bigger fan of adaptive reuse. I had one guest that called it, which I loved, called it radical reuse. And I was talking to him about a project where they took something that had been something completely different and adapted it into a whole new use. But again, saving so much in time and money and our environment by doing that. I love that term, radical reuse.
Yeah. Well, I would say the office space that Kirk and I are in right now and behind us used to be a Nordstrom rack, and it is now been radically reused as our office.
Yeah, we've got public projects, in nearby up the street that used to be office buildings converted to housing that we've worked on, converting auto shops to yoga studios and ice cream, as well as, even taking old repair shops and turning them into food and beverage.
That whole
Gathering
adapting,
parking because cars were stacked.
offices to housing is a really hot thing across the country right now. In looking at that all over the place, ever since COVID, I work from home. I didn't go back. I mean, that works for my job and my experience level and everything, but I have to work for multiple offices. I actually drove everybody crazy at work because I was constantly on video calls and on calls with all of the different offices. And we have our Portland office is not a super large space and it's an open office environment. But that's left a lot of empty offices in Portland. And they're really looking at that right now. I'm really interested to see how much that could potentially solve our housing crisis. You'd like to
Well,
hope.
yeah, we've completed 6 office to housing conversions, and we have 4 more on the boards. And um, I think it's not the silver bullet to solve everything, but it is one of the approaches that's important. It's taking, like, to your point, there's almost 1 billion square feet of office space that's not being used right now, and if we can convert some of that to housing, it's making lemonade out of lemons. And what we have found in our projects is that a lot of these office commercial districts are pretty sterile and dead at night and weekends because all the office workers are gone. But now, if every fifth building has residents in it, you've got people walking their dogs and jogging, and they're becoming neighborhoods, mixed use neighborhoods which are much more vibrant and interesting than just an office district. So,
And that also need things like a grocery store and a Nordstrom's rack. And, and so that would also, I know it's coming back pretty well now, but during and after COVID, our Portland downtown core really struggled. And people living there, people there all the time, that brings business and can completely revitalize an area. They've done it here too. I don't know how many we've done here yet, but everybody's talking about it. I've noticed that. So, what would you say was your biggest, out of this whole project, what was the biggest design challenge that you faced? And how did you solve it? Like when you looked at this project and you went, how am I going to make that work? Is there one that stands out for you? I know in adaptive reuse, there's usually like 50 you could talk about. Pick one that's notable.
I'd say for the building itself, it was the structural and mechanical systems. A conventional approach to solving both of those problems would have decimated the interiors of the building, and we wanted all of that infrastructure that needed to function to be hidden and located in such a way that if somebody came back from 1941 and walked into this space, they would still say this feels like home. And so that was definitely the biggest challenge for the building itself.
And then on the landscape architecture side, I would say the biggest challenge was just scale. You've got some buildings that are established, but how do you really create the right scale in between to make passengers feel very welcome and comforted at the same time, allowing enough space for flexibility and when it gets very busy. And if you land at night, are you still experiencing the outdoor spaces as a comfortable space just as much as during the day? So that's where the catenary lighting came in to kind of have that warm lighting. Even if there's only 6 to 8 people walking through one section at the last flight at night, you still feel safe and comfortable. And you've got a lot of lighting, and the fact that you can see through the building as well, that really helps you feel like you're kind of not just wandering between buildings that are kind of turning their back to you. It's very much you feel like this can be navigated quite easily now. There's very limited signage and wayfinding as well. It's very intuitive. So you get dropped off, you kind of know where you're going. So that really helps too. You don't feel like you have to wander around at night and worried about what's going to happen.
And I hadn't thought about, I can't even count how many times I've flown home from somewhere late at night. And it's not always, or flown somewhere else late at night. It's not always comfortable late at night walking out of an airport, going to a parking garage or walking across a plaza or wherever you need to go. And I don't know, probably even more particularly women feel that way. But, I like to see what's around me, and I like to know where
Mhm.
I'm going. And I want things to be lit up. I don't want dark hidey holes where I have to walk around. And I really hadn't thought about that aspect, but it's an important one.
Right. And there really aren't any hard stops and starts with the lighting as well. I mean, the catenary lighting is contained within the baggage claim building and the ticketing building and kind of edged by the terminal. But as soon as you get around the terminal building, now you've got the lighting in the palm trees, and then you've got the lighting out at the street. So you really never lose anything. You don't really feel like you're kind of walking between shadows. It's just, even though they're all different types of lighting, it's very consistent to feel like you've got the same quality of light everywhere.
Well, I will appreciate that when I come there. So I love this. This is like one of my favorite questions to ask in every interview. So construction is completed. And there is not a project I have ever worked on that doesn't have one good, juicy construction story. You get going, you're working with the contractors, and something comes up you weren't prepared for. Or
Mhm.
something has to pivot because something's not coming together quite the way you anticipated. There's always something. And it's not, it's just every project. It's not because anything was wrong. I don't even like to call them problems, especially in adaptive reuse. Adaptive
Uh,
reuse is one challenge after another during construction. Um, Tell me about one interesting thing that came up during construction that you had to navigate.
Well, I think because we had so many phases, that in one of the initial phases with the ticketing building, the three palm trees on the south side of the terminal were all went in. When it came time to get the three for the north side, they couldn't get the same heights, and so we wanted to make sure we could match. So at the end of the day, we had to compromise with about 2 feet, just to make sure they were all matching. And so we said, it's going to be very rare that someone's going to see all 6 palm trees at the same time, and I find it hard if they would see there's a discrepancy in height. Eventually, they'll catch up to each other. But in the process of them installing those 3 trees, they said everything that you said per the survey. Well, there's some things that weren't on the survey, or it's actually not per the survey. So they ended up finding a huge concrete vault right where the middle tree was supposed to go. So that was a little bit of a battle of, well, the tree can't shift with the other 2 trees are there because now they're not even equal distance. So we had to quickly come up with, like, how do we redesign this and space it out to avoid that, and then still make it look like it all like nothing ever happened. So that was a quick challenge on the fly. We had to solve that, I think, in less than 24 hours. It's always a challenge in construction. This project was mostly work, late at night, early mornings. So working on an airport that's constantly operational, you don't want to disrupt passengers' experiences. You get late night calls. You're getting called out to the job site at 6:30 a.m. We got to do this mock up. We got to review it before we take this fence down. The fence has to be down in 15 minutes. You don't usually have projects where you have to make a field decision in 15 minutes or less. Usually you can phone a friend, phone a colleague. Hey, what do you think about this? They're like, there's no time. We need to make this call now. And so it was a lot of just on the spot decision making and just hoping you made the right call and everything, kind of thinking about what you're doing and how it affects even future phases, because there's a ripple effect everywhere.
I hadn't considered the urgency that you would have in a, I mean, and I'm surprised I didn't, but in a working airport, Portland, they did most of their work overnight and had to get a building permit every day. And there were things that there was no wiggle room. This piece has to be done by this day at this time. That's a lot of stress. You better have some really good contract documents.
As well as, making those decisions, they were like, if we don't have this decision today, and of course it has to be fully documented,
Right.
and the airport has to know about what you're doing. That's always this constant communication loop. But they would say, if we don't have a decision today by, let's say, 4 o'clock, we're going to have to bring that trade back in a month, because if they don't work on it tomorrow, they're on to the next phase and the next thing. And so that's your window of opportunity. Get back to us ASAP.
I hope you all took a vacation.
But this was for real. The urgency was real.
I can't. I mean, I've worked on some pretty stressful projects over the years, but airports in particular, or those kinds of, high use public areas that have to stay in use, are really a completely different animal. Some hospitals are like that, as well. It's just, there's no, but one of the things I do a lot of teaching. One of the things that I have this list of statements Cherise can't stand, and it's lengthy. We won't talk about them, but just one is one of the things I just drives me insane is when one of the architects or one of the engineers I'm working with will say, I'll be trying to coordinate something in the documents, and they'll say, I don't have time. I'll just deal with that during construction. Actually, I just told you 2 of them. I don't have time.
Right.
And I'll deal with that during construction. And I'm always like, that is the worst time to have to deal with this. You just don't have that kind of leeway on a project like this.
Yeah.
Well,
I think from a building perspective, we had thousands of feet of just conduit, cables, wiring, and they were all installed ad hoc. They were in somebody's head from 30 years ago. None of it was documented. And so there was just a tremendous amount of time tracking where these things went, and were they alive? Were they dead? 3/4 of in some areas, 3/4 of the wiring wasn't even used anymore, but no one knew what to do or where to disconnect it. And there were a few moments where people just didn't know what wire was doing what, and they would just clip it and hope for the best. Like nothing would explode or an alarm wouldn't go off. And to this day, we didn't have any trouble from that perspective, but there was just not a lot of documentation of what was being installed over the last 85 years. So
sounds like MEP earned their money on this one.
Yeah.
They worked for every bit of that fee. So what would you say? I think every project teaches us a lesson, one lesson or another. What would you say was your biggest lesson learned from this project that helped you grow as a professional and makes you a better architect for the next project?
I think for me, typically when I think about what did you learn, it's always, kind of learn from a mistake and use that as a catalyst to kind of bring that to the next project. Certainly there was common issues we had to resolve and things like that. But really the thing that really struck me, the lesson I learned was, at Studio, we usually do as much as possible, kind of reach out to the community, get engagement surveys, or really understand how the users are going to experience the space. And then it's a lot more difficult to have follow up to understand how did they really like how it turned out. So for me, being able to fly in and out of the airport over the whole course of construction, I got to hear everyone saying how excited they were. And even now I hear almost every time I fly in, I'm so glad I flew into Long Beach. It's my favorite airport. I love this airport. It's so relaxed. It's so nice. It's so easy. And so for me, the lesson was, okay, even though it was a hard process, we got the scale right, we got the feeling right. And so I'm just incredibly proud to hear other people say, I really like what, without saying to me directly, you don't know I'm worked on the project, I'm just standing in line. But to hear them say, we really like how this airport works. This is awesome.
Well, I love the message you just sent because so often we'll go back. If we go back at all, we'll go back to something we've worked on in the past and we'll pick it apart because, like we were talking about before we started recording, we are so self critical. It's why I don't listen to my podcasts. We'll go and pick it up. Oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. I could have done this. There's always going to be some of that because there's always going to be something you could have done differently. But often that focus is there of just kind of picking apart the little things that could have been different. Or if we would have had more budget, we could have done this. Rather than why not flip that script like you just described and go back and because your normal, average, everyday person does not see most of those things you're talking about. They'll see the things that are the real mistakes. But go back and just sit in that lounge and watch people experience the building. Look at do they look totally stressed out and lost, or are they chilling out and having a good time? I think that's the real testament to any project is how are the people who actually have to be in that building all the time, the people that work there, the people that travel through there, how are they reacting to it? Not, did you miss one little thing that nobody sees
Yeah.
but you? How about you, Michael?
I would just add on to Kirk's comment about, the user is ultimately our test of happiness and joy. But I think there was also the LA Times had listed the 7 best architectural projects for 2025, and the Long Beach Airport was one of those 7. And that came from a writer named Sam Lubell, and that was a really unexpected, wonderful feeling to get that acknowledgement from someone outside the community and saying, this is really a special airport. And it didn't just fall together out of good luck. It was consciously done over a long period of time. So I think that was really nice to hear as well. I think for me, I always think of government agencies as being very stable. And we talked about this briefly before, but that government agencies are stable, and it might be an easier way to get things done and built. But as we talked about earlier, we had 5 different directors, we've had different mayors, just different council members. Council districts change, and so now we have a different council member that represents us. And just so there was, as Kirk mentioned, 30 plus people in the kickoff meeting that had a voice in it. But then out of all those people, most of them have shifted out, and many of them 5 times shifted out, and all those different voices and kind of herding the cats was exponentially important on this, because everyone's working in their own silo and has their own opinion about one little piece of it, but very few people are looking at the overall component of how does this all mesh together. And that's really an important part of the job for the architect and landscape architect, is to be that orchestrator to make sure that music produced by the orchestra makes sense.
I don't
And I
think
think
people give it enough credit. I think it's one of the most important things because everything else falls apart if you can't herd the cats.
Yeah,
There's an awful lot of effort, and I would say just as important as kind of keeping the big idea in play the whole time is managing expectations. Really, I mean, you've got all kinds of different people coming together, and are we all thinking the same thing about what are we expecting to get out of this? What are we expecting to be done today on construction? What happens next? Like being able to anticipate and constantly talking about, we're all in this. This is what you can expect. This is what we're going to expect from each other. And it's a lot of communication.
So before we get to our 2 closing questions, we always close with these 2 questions, or with 2 questions. Tell me about, what is Studio 111 working on now? Now that you hopefully had a nice long vacation to recover from that project. It's a long-term project. What are you working on now that I get to call you later and say, hey, can you come back and tell me about this one?
I can go first. I would love to be able to talk about a project that's almost done. It's literally like a week away from being finalized. It's had 3 phases. It's been going on for about 5.5 years, and it's a project at Rancho Los Cerritos. And it's a stormwater capture and reuse project, and it's a unique project in the fact that it's on a local, state, and national historic landmark site, and it's the only stormwater project that we know of on a project scale and site like that. So it's extremely unique. Um, I think again, one of the things there is less is more. Like it's a historic site. How do you bring in kind of new infrastructure, but not draw attention to itself? So you're spending money, you're getting grants, people come and go, "What did you guys do here?" In some ways, it's a compliment. In other ways, it's like we have to justify what you've been working on. But that again has lots of players. It's a it's a city owned property, but you're working with a lot of different stakeholders, multiple phases, and again, keeping the big vision alive from the very get go of like, let's go after a grant. What's the big idea? So even when the Rancho came to us, they said, we think we can go after a grant, but we have to have a big idea. And so one of the first things we did is came up with a concept, but it started with the name. Again, like at the airport, looking back at historical photos to really kind of influence what we're doing. I said, look, the ranchos had so many different eras of ways they've had to deal with drought, changing from cattle to sheep and farming, electricity and water. Let's look back to advance forward. And that's our name. That's the name of the project. So that'll be an exciting one to share when it's all said and done, which is very, very close.
Give me a call when it's done.
I think for me, Cherise, we talked a little bit about office to housing conversions, and we just got a permit for the armory. It's another historic landmark that was a state armory in Long Beach, and we're now converting it. It was decommissioned about 10 years ago, and we're going to now adaptively reuse it for affordable housing for seniors. And in the historic armory itself, one floor will have units in it. Another floor will have amenities. And then the drill hall, which we weren't sure what to do with, we're actually going to work with the adjacent Catholic high school to make that their academy for the arts. And so we're excited about that. And then behind the armory was a surface parking lot, and we're going to add another 52 units to house seniors there as well. So that one's a new building, but it's also keeping this older building, which is spectacular. And so in this case, I get the best of both worlds, a new building and an old building mixed together.
And helping accommodate the school.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, okay. So you both have to call me when you're ready to don't wait for an invitation. You don't need to do that. Just drop me an email and say, hey, Cherise, want to chat? I always close with 2 questions. A more broad industry question, and then the final question I ask everybody. I have yet to have anybody turn me down on that question. I'll probably cry if they do. So first with the broad industry question. This has been a long-term project, altogether over a decade, multiple phases, multiple different players changing out over the years and even throughout the project. What advice or best practices would you offer to effectively manage and plan a long-term, very critical types of projects? Like if you sat down a young professional in front of you and this is their first time, what advice would you give them?
I would probably say a number of things. Number one, I'd say like principal involvement or some sort of senior leadership needs to be consistent the whole time. So basically saying, look, the team that works on this may ebb and flow, even with consultants and others, but the principal involvement needs to be consistent. So there's this guiding force to really tell them what they're to anticipate next. And really, I think our job in this case was this whole project was a puzzle piece or a puzzle. But you could easily say, well, I'm just a landscape architect and I'm just looking at my piece. But you really have to understand everybody's puzzle piece comes together. So you could easily say, well, that's not my problem. That's an electrical engineer's question. It's like, well, it is your problem because it affects you. It affects us. if I make a decision, it trickles down. If they make a decision, it affects me. So that, again, it's understanding that you're part of a much bigger picture than just staying in your lane. And so it's really important to collaborate and kind of building trust with your consultants and really being able to pick up the phone. You don't always have to send an email. It's just like, hey, it's Kirk. Can we chat about this? Absolutely. What sheet number are you on? What's the prep? I've got this RFI. Can we go over it? Just having that level of it's still professional, but also casual at the same time. You kind of built this rapport with your team.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think the importance of storytelling and that big idea, having a strong concept on day one, and then telling a story that people will remember and think about it as well as us. We still have to be the orchestra leader and make the final decisions, but trying to get people at least thinking about it and align with it. So when we disagree with something, that's a decision that's made, that everybody says, well, that makes sense. You're right. We should make that change, as opposed to, we don't have time. We only got 15 minutes. We got to keep moving. So the big idea in storytelling. And then I think, to Kirk's point, continuity, as we talked about, so many people coming in and out, continuity within our firm has got to be pretty consistent. I mean, Kirk and I have been working together for, gosh, 15 years. Boy, 15 years. So, it's good to get new people in and ideas and disruption, but it's also important to have continuity. And for, if it was only I working on this and Kirk had left, I think the landscape would have suffered. I think if I would have left, the architecture would have suffered. So the continuity of both of us being here and working together and wanting to work together and enjoying to collaborate and to hear a criticism from Kirk about something I'm suggesting, it's an open book. There's I don't care whose idea it is. I just want to find the best idea.
Yeah.
So
I think the beauty of our firm is this interdisciplinary mentality is, it's easy just to, again, stay in your lane. But if I'm out in the field or I'm in a meeting and I hear something about the buildings or I hear something architectural, I'm keeping our studio's best interest in mind. I'm calling Michael or any other senior person saying, hey, I just heard about this. You need to know this. Or they're out in the field going, I know they weren't ready to install any of your design yet, but I just heard that they're going to move this trunk line over. And I'm like, well, shoot, that's right through something else. So it's really kind of looking out for each other to make sure that you are getting the best product at the end of the day. And to be able to tell your client, like, that's the reason we care so much. It's because we want that to really, at the end of the day, you want people who look at the project to go, oh, it looks so easy. And I think that's the best part of a project. When it looks easy, you know how hard it was.
I think another way of saying Kirk's comment about staying in your lane, or not staying in your lane, but looking at things broader, is this idea of total architect or total landscape architect. That just because, oh, that's not what I do, it's still our responsibility. We still have to look at, oh, how does that impact the outcome of our big idea? So
I've never been able to understand the silos so many work in our business, and I've seen it my entire career. That's not my job, or that's not mine to worry about. There's nobody on a project that's more important than anybody else, because that project's not happening unless every single one of those people do their job well. And part of that is being able to effectively connect to all the other things your work is going to touch, or theirs is going to affect yours. And we don't always do a very good job of that. And I'm not afraid to say so. It's somewhere, and I think it's more critical now than ever before. To your point, Kirk, about having that continuity in principal leadership or in leadership on the team, no matter who comes in and out. We have and I talk about this all the time, a very huge generational flip happening right now. It's been happening for a number of years. It's 2030 is when the last of the train hits the wall, but the train's already hitting the wall and there's an imbalance. And so we have a lot of young people in every firm, and we have boomers running out the door, and little Gen X people don't count for nothing. And we're even shorter in our industry because of the 2 recessions we've had in our adult lives. So there's just not that many of us, and we're all overworked trying to mentor and become the new leadership and run the firms and all of that as well. And I've seen projects fall apart due to, especially long-term projects, due to a lack of continuity
in leadership, and become very ineffective projects because, and I know you can't count over a 10-year project, you can't count on that leadership being there that whole 10 years. Other things happen, but sometimes you can. And when you have that, having the principal go away to somewhere else and leaving the team to kind of fend for themselves when they weren't in all those planning meetings, they weren't a part of all those conversations. I think that that's something people don't think about enough. I'm glad you mentioned that. So final question, easiest one of the day. When I smile, I'm lying to you. I know, I'm kidding. I hope we all want to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. So for each of you, personal or professional, it does not have to be about architecture. What do you hope your impact will be?
I would say for myself, the profession and even just our entire society, having a greater appreciation of older buildings and the importance of adaptive reuse. Our office has completed over 36 different projects, and we talked about, spanning from churches to retail stores to office buildings to housing and retail, and converting them in every which way possible, and really espousing the value of this. Keeping continuity in cities is important, and especially beloved buildings. They tend to be they can be cheaper and they can be faster to restore, and you sometimes don't get as much pushback because people say, "Oh, the building's there. I know what I'm getting." But we talked about the sustainability component, of of lower embodied carbon, and not letting the building itself go into a dump. And I think there's also just these older buildings help keep a city unique, creating a unique sense of place. I think something that springs up all at once is harder to be authentic and harder to be unique. And I think keeping some of our older buildings within our communities makes it a richer, more interesting place.
I agree. How about you, Kirk?
I think for me, in terms of professional, as Michael alluded to earlier, like we really have this total architect mentality here. So I'd like to have a legacy of people say, "Oh, Kirk was a total landscape architect. Like he knew enough about architecture, structural engineering, civil engineering. He really could be that conductor and understand how all the instruments play together. But at the end of the day, can kind of lead it to somewhere." And so I don't really have a one style like, "Oh, I could totally tell that Kirk did that, or studio did that." We're always adapting to context. So I think the other legacy too is that like you can't really identify a specific style. It's wow, well, this community needed this aspect, or this design really needed this quality to it. And they all have a very enduring, timeless. It's a social value, it's economic and environmental value that we're adding. It's not just this pizzazz of like a beautiful photo at the end of the day with nobody in the space. It's people use this all day long, uh, and the value that we add is are we creating social spaces that are really enduring and adding value?
I think to Kirk's comment, one of the biggest compliments is we work on other projects within the city, and we say, when someone says, "Well, what projects have you worked on?" and we say the Long Beach Airport, we have had people stand up and applaud because they are just so proud of that project. So it isn't about us. It's all of a sudden now the community in the city has embraced it as something of deep pride and richness, and they personally are attached to it. And I think that's one of the greatest compliments for our legacy as well.
Yeah, a sense of community ownership.
Well, and I think you will always get those kind of compliments when you don't design to have a signature. I actually think the best architecture, I'm not saying there isn't some amazing, notable buildings out there, but they're amazing. But the best architecture is the one that perfectly serves that client, not the one that I can look at and say, oh, that's a Zaha Hadid building or whatever. But taking the Starchitects to the side, which is, it's just like getting into the NFL, the little 1% of people that get to do that. And then all the rest of us working on all the buildings we all have to actually use every single day. That's what matters most. And I appreciate not knowing who did that building, but walking in and feeling that building in that space. And that's why they're standing up and applauding, because you guys did a fantastic job on this project. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for coming and chatting with me today and putting up with me. I just looked at the clock. I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to be in trouble again. I'm in trouble all the time. I figured we go over. I apologize for going quite that much over, but it's a great project. There's so many aspects to talk about. I appreciate your time, and I thank you for joining me today, and I hope you'll come back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're both honored to be here with you. So, thank you.